Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and you're all very welcome to this lecture this evening on the Irish Land Commission records. Can I first of all thank Michael Byrne and all the staff of the Offaly Historical Society for the invitation to deliver this lecture. Delighted to be back once again in Tullamore. So let us begin by looking at some of the historical context to the Irish Land Commission. And as we know, the centrality of land reform to Irish life, society and politics during the 19th and 20th centuries has been well documented by historians, but not so much the pivotal role of the Irish Land Commission, first established under the 1881 Land Act. Beginning as a regulator of fair rents, the Commission soon evolved into the great facilitator of land transfer. But overemphasis on these aspects of its work can sometimes camouflage its equal significance as the main instigator and architect of rural reform. There's no doubt that for most of its existence from 1881 to 1992, the Land Commission was the most important state body operating out of rural Ireland, where its long tentacles spread into every nook and cranny, as indeed its ghost continues to do. But even though the Land Commission has been dissolved for 30 years, its archives have not yet been opened to the research public, except on an extremely limited basis. And the anomaly of this is often very difficult to explain. The official line has always been that these remain working records required by the legal fraternity in relation to land registration and transfer, that they don't come under the Freedom of Information Act, and that they contain a great deal of sensitive material that should remain closed for the foreseeable future. And no one has officially admitted that they might reveal a great deal of political skullduggery, but it is a possibility that is hard to dismiss. What is more certain is the loss to Irish historical research, which is to be greatly lamented. If nothing else, the stymied access has obstructed historians, and indeed scholars from a wide variety of other disciplines, including but not exclusively geography, sociology, anthropology, and political studies, in fully appraising countless topics, from the most fundamental, as the importance of the everyday work of the Land Commission, to the more complex analysis of any intersection between land and politics, especially after Irish independence in 1922. Simply put, the denial of full access to the Land Commission archives prevents the writing of the definitive history of Ireland in all its dimensions, social, economic, political and culture, as the country evolved from British colony to statehood and beyond. So the aim of this talk is twofold. First of all, to illuminate the importance of the Land Commission records to any future understanding of the evolution of modern Ireland, and by extension, to convince both academic and public audiences of the importance to continue to lobby the Irish government to fully open the archives to the research public. Under the 1881 Land Act, the Irish Land Commission was established, and I quote, as a body corporate and a court of records with the powers, rights and privileges of the High Court relating to matters within its jurisdiction, unquote. It was to consist of a judicial commissioner and two other commissioners, paid the rather handsome salary of £3,000 per annum, with a central office in Dublin on Merrion Square, but with the power to hold sittings in any other part of Ireland. The Land Commission's initial work relating to the fixing of fair rents has been examined by numerous historians. Suffice to say here that by reducing rents in a politically volatile climate, the Land Commission contributed notably to the stabilisation of agrarian society during the turbulent years of the 1880s and beyond, and thereby, as R.V. Comerford puts it, mediating a change with an imperturbability unachievable by politicians increasingly susceptible to public pressures. As the Irish Land Commission progressed from the fixer of fair rents to the facilitator of tenant proprietorship, it was hardly surprising that the Commission's role was expanded under the 1885 Land Act, and it assumed responsibility for the advancement of loans to tenants to purchase their holdings and for collecting the annual repayments or annuities at 4% interest over 49 years on behalf of the British Exchequer. Later, Under the 1891 Land Act, the Commission was given permanent status and a central role in the governance of the Congested Districts Board, created under the same Act and charged with addressing the problems of extreme poverty in the counties along the western seaboard from Donegal to Cork. Under the 1903 Land Act, the jurisdiction, powers and duties of the Land Commission were thenceforward to be performed exclusively by 3 members of the Commission, known as the Estates Commissioners, and these became responsible for the revolutionary transfer of land that took place between November 1903 and the outbreak of World War I, when land purchase was suspended in the interests of the British war effort. But while the origins and mechanisms of the 1903 Land Act and topics such as landlord investment behaviour have attracted important scholarly attention in recent years, many other crucial topics remain to be investigated, including, for instance, the flight of Irish landlords following the break-up of their estates, the resulting fate of their big houses and domains, the reimagining of the designed rural landscape, much of it dating to the 18th century, the impact on local town and village economies denuded of a resident aristocrat, his family and retinue, and the fallout from the redundancy of domestic servants, estate craftsmen and labourers, gamekeepers, woodsmen, bailiffs, and eventually churchmen and their congregations. The almost total suspension of Land Commission activities during the years of the Great War, most particularly land acquisition and redistribution of land for the relief of congestion, gave rise once again to rural frustrations, especially among smallholders and landless labourers, and this helped fuel another land war between 1917 and 1923, which was brought more or less to a close upon the Free State government's introduction of a new Land Act in August 1923. Before it could be implemented, the Commission had to be reconstituted, and so on 24th of July 1923, the Land Law Commission Act was passed, transferring all powers of the Commission to the Free State government, placing it under the control of the Minister for Agriculture and dissolving the Congested Districts Board. Under the 1923 Land Act, the process of the final transfer of tenanted land from landlord to occupier began. More controversially, the Land Commission was given extraordinary powers to compulsorily acquire and redistribute all untenanted lands required for the relief of congestion, that is, to bring small farms up to a viable level. Now, after being voted into power in 1932, Fianna Fáil provided impetus to land acquisition and redistribution with its own Land Act in 1933. It had been Fianna Fáil's declared intention since the 1920s, and I quote, to complete land purchase, break up the large grazing ranches, and distribute them as economic farms amongst young men and agricultural labourers, such as those compelled at present to emigrate, unquote. The Commission was therefore given more radical powers. It could now acquire any domain lands, parklands, and home farms previously exempted. An abandoned big house could no longer be used as proof of residency, so absentee estates were particularly targeted. Moreover, reforms introduced by the temporary Minister for Lands, Frank Aiken, increased the opportunity for allocating land to IRA veterans as reward for the role they had played in the independence struggle, a dimension of the longer revolutionary period yet to be fully explored. Fianna Fáil also had to tackle the redistribution of lands on numerous domains and estates which had been occupied or grabbed during the 1920 to 23 period, and upon which the great muddle of who was entitled to land had yet to be sorted. From 1933, the work of the Land Commission took on another important social dimension, the relief of Western congestion through the migration of smallholders to the Midlands and the East. For the years for which statistics are available, 1937 to 78, the Land Commission migrated over 14,500 farmers, mainly from areas of the West, onto lands totaling over 382,000 acres in the East and Midlands. And this was a social engineering project of some magnitude, and it wasn't easily achieved. The process of migration involved many difficulties, practical, legal, and technical, of which not the least was the objection of smallholders and landless in the neighbourhood to immigrants being given land to which they considered they and their families had a prior claim. When Gerald Boland of Fianna Fáil, Minister for Lands, announced the migration scheme from the west of Ireland to County Meath in 1938, the people of Bohermeen and district formed an association and elected an all-party committee to object, and graffiti soon appeared on walls warning, "No migrants for Allenswood," or "The Mead land for the Mead men." It was made crystal clear that the national need was not as great as local want. Timothy Linehan, TD, Fine Gael, had some sympathy for Land Commission inspectors attempting to deal with such local situations. They are, he said, in the midst of a seething mob of people, every one of whom expects to get land, and every one of whom has at the back of his own mind the idea that he's able to work a little greater pull than another. Again, while much work has recently been done on the topic of migration, Tony Varley's conclusion is extremely apt in the context of this talk. I quote, "Any assessment of the pressures brought to bear on inspectors and the land commissioners in individual cases, and with what effect, must await the release of the Land Commission records," unquote. As already suggested, the impact of the work of the Land Commission on the rural landscape, never mind the rural mindset, was enormous. The Land Commission's web spread so wide that there were very few families in rural Ireland whose lives it did not at some stage impact. For generations, there were families living in dread of the Commission compulsorily acquiring their land for the relief of congestion. Not only the former landlord class, but also extensive farmers who had purchased under the British Land Acts and who at different times found themselves on the wrong side of the Cumann na Gael or Fine Gael versus Fianna Fáil political divide. There were much larger numbers of smallholders, agricultural labourers and rural landless who lived in hope of getting land from the division of an estate. Too often a false hope, perpetuated by politicians for political capital, especially around election time. There were also unfortunate families who, often through no fault of their own, fell in hard luck, were unable to pay their annuities and lived in trepidation that the Land Commission would take back their land. And there were plenty of greedy neighbours, only too willing to encourage the Commission to do so. In summary, under the Free State Land Acts, the Land Commission completed the transfer of tenanted land in the 26 county area, and eventually acquired and redistributed most of the domain and untenanted lands that had remained in the former landed elites' ownership, and thereby reshaping the colonial landscape, in large part through the demolition of scores of big houses, the most obvious physical symbols of British imperialism, or else through their sale for a variety of new purposes, such as schools, training colleges, monasteries, convents, and hotels. As Eamon Crook has explained, the full extent of this phenomenon cannot, of course, be revealed because the Land Commission records are not accessible, but there is no doubt that an intriguing history remains to be told, as are other tantalising sidelights to redistribution. For instance, the legacy of tensions over sporting and fishing rights, which in some parts continue to cause rancour up to recent times, and the allotment of lands for the creation of hundreds of playing fields, ostensibly for all games and open to all organisations promoting sports and athletics, though former Land Commission official PJ Salmon strongly suspected, and I quote, that the majority of sports fields were allotted for GAA games, unquote, a thought-provoking topic for those interested in nation building. So at the peak of its operations in the 1930s, in terms of acres acquired and redistributed, the Land Commission employed in the region of 1,350 people, making it the largest state agency in Ireland. It was divided into several branches or sections, and while these branches were refashioned from time to time to cater for changing circumstances, the principal ones remained the same. The Secretariat, for instance, controlled the management and regulation of the personnel of the Commission, prepared statistical information to address the hundreds of questions asked in the Dáil every year about estates to be divided, and dealt with all correspondence. In 1943, a civil servant commenting upon the amount of irrelevant correspondence, as he called it, that arrived in the Land Commission offices every day stated, and again I quote, "Unfortunately, the Land Commission is regarded in the rural mind as a sort of universal benefactor, competent to deal with every requirement from the cleaning of a drain to the repair of an embankment, from the trespass of a neighbour to the making of a road," unquote. So as a result, one can only imagine the richness of the social history available to the historian in such correspondence. But the question is, has it survived? Back in the 1950s, K.D. Buckley claimed that scarcely any of the Land Commission's correspondence has survived. It appears, he said, that a large amount was pulped about 8 years ago, unquote. And this would have been towards the end of World War II, when presumably paper shortages might have prompted this calamitous decision. Moreover, in his Land Commission memoir, P.J. Salmon wrote that further pruning of estate files was authorised in the late 1960s by the revesting branch. And very recently, an inquiry to the Department of Agriculture on the correspondence elicited the following response: "The Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine does not hold records of correspondence of the type referred to by the requester." The complete loss of these files would represent a monumental loss to the social history of Ireland. So let us hope that at least some of them can be found. The Acquisition and Resale Division dealt with the purchase and redistribution of lands. And when Fianna Fáil came to power in 1932, with the ambition to increase land division to an annual target of 100,000 acres, P.J. Salmon thought himself fortunate to be transferred to this branch. "The basic fact," he wrote, "is that the land hunger of all small farmers elevated the work of the resale branch to a pre-eminence not really attained by other branches." The Land Commission became central to the myth of nation building, and some sense of its unwritten agenda may be gleaned from Salmon's reflection on the Derry Bay estate in Donegal, on which there had been a notorious mass clearance of tenants in the 1860s. It was, he said, wonderful to be involved in the restoration of these lands to Irish landowners. In the year ended 31st of March 1935, a record 123,000 acres had been divided among 7,000 allottees, and the then Minister for Lands, Joseph Connolly, told the Land Commission staff, "We are engaged on work of supreme national importance, and our efforts of today are building up the prospects of tomorrow for our country's welfare." In relation to the archive itself, it is estimated that there are around 35,000 individual estate boxes containing deeds, valuers' maps, and general descriptions of lands. The valuer reports not only describe individual holdings and their buildings, but they provide details on local markets, transport facilities, and wider local agricultural practices. These estate boxes should contain particulars and conditions of sale, the allocation of fishing and sporting rights, and miscellaneous correspondence relating to a myriad of topics, including the fixing of land boundaries, a universal source of grievance, where families fought, as Patrick Kavanagh, the Monaghan poet, put it, over who owned that half a rood of rock and no man's land, the type of tensions that could lead to rural violence and sometimes even murder. For the purposes of the division of an acquired estate, a Land Commission inspector was sent to an area to gather all the facts he could about each prospective allottee who lived within a stipulated radius. Each applicant was interviewed to determine the number in his family, making the records a genealogical source of some significance, the amount and type of stock that he held, and evidence of capital available to him to invest in any future holding. Now, as noted already, Potential allottees could, it seems, reveal more about their neighbours who were in competition with them than they did about themselves. In fact, one land commissioner claimed that, and I quote, "When the inspector is going his rounds at this work, he inevitably hears the whole truth, for the competition for land is so keen that each applicant will see to it that his neighbour will not get away with his particular story," unquote. These records would surely reveal extraordinary insights to the complex social world of Irish rural society and allow for a detailed analysis of a community life at a given point in time. And one should not overlook the foundational collection within the Land Commission records, that of the Church Temporalities Commission, which, after the passing of the Irish Church Act in 1869, took charge of the Church of Ireland's property. Under the Irish Church Amendment Act of 1881, passed 5 days after the 1881 Land Act, all lands, tenements and hereditaments, and every estate and interest therein, and all fixtures and furniture belonging to the commissioners of church temporalities in Ireland in their capacity as such commissioners were vested in the Irish Land Commission. So the first archive was therefore that of the Temporalities Commission, including the records of its predecessor, the Board of First Fruits, founded in 1711. So from this brief survey alone, it should be tantalizingly clear that in their totality, the Land Commission records are a unique source, informing on everything from who owned or owns the land of Ireland to the impact of divergent agricultural and rural reform ideological philosophies of the major political parties of the day. They enlighten on the shaping and redesign of physical and indeed mental and cultural landscapes. They map the creation and disappearance of designed landscapes around big houses, the reasons for agrarian agitation and litigation, the migration of smallholders from west to east, the flight from the land when small farm life became unviable and unsustainable after independence, rural poverty and hardship, social inequality in general, the lives of women and children, the lengths some families went to in order to retain ownership of their farms. And the list could go on to research infinity. For instance, the records can reveal a whole new layer of complexity regarding our understanding of how the Irish Revolution of 1920 to 23 played itself out in the decades which followed. To what extent did the Land Commission, the body with the greatest power to enact revolutionary social change, embrace that potential, or did it simply become another pawn of local elites, including politicians, extensive farmers, gombeen shopkeepers, and the local Catholic clergy, too often all friends of the wealthy and masters of the poor? As newspaper reports testify, rural Ireland post-independence was seething with frustration, local jealousies, bitterness, and anger as lands were divided. Assiduous researchers with an eye for the forensic of land transfer and redistribution patterns will reveal further the depths of political shenanigans practiced in Ireland over generations after independence, a topic which I touched on myself some years ago in a book entitled The Land for the People. And finally, but no less importantly, the records are considered to be of immense value as genealogical sources both for local communities and the diaspora alike. In the view of Fiona Fitzsimons, director of Find My Past Ireland, and I quote, "The records of the Irish Land Commission are probably the single greatest untapped resource for studying the population of Ireland in the 19th century and a lodestone for academic and family historians," unquote. And of course, they go way beyond the 19th century. That means, by extension, that they have huge potential to offer the heritage and tourism industries. So perhaps it's not just one department, agriculture, that should be responsible for the massive project that would be the digitization of the records, but rather an interdepartmental mission, including heritage, tourism, arts, and the Gaeltacht. After all, the congested district board records are very heavily focused on traditional Gaeltacht areas. In addition, they undoubtedly could also be used to inform on environment, climate, food, the marine, rural and community development. In brief, there's no end to the Land Commission's historical footprint, or indeed the potential of using its past to inform the present and plan for the future. And yet, as I noted at the outset of this talk, they remain in large part closed to the research public. After dissolution in 1992, the Land Commission records were moved from Bishop Street to a warehouse facility in Clonminham Estate in Portlaoise, County Laois. The National Archives were not in a position to take custody of what were categorised as working records, consulted on a regular basis by the legal profession, who required access in relation to the transfer of property and legal title, mapping and valuation. And this becomes the reason given by a long line of ministers for agriculture to deny open access. For example, at the beginning of 2003, when former Taoiseach John Bruton of Fine Gael inquired of the Minister for Agriculture, Joe Walsh, the reasons why the records are not open to scholars and others, he received the following reply. These records have not been formally handed over to the National Archives, as they contain title documentation of all land acquired by the former Commission for redistribution under the Land Purchase Acts. These records are referred to on a daily basis by my staff, who deal with ongoing queries relating to current and past transactions involving the former Land Commission." Unquote. Adding another pretext in 2012, Minister for Agriculture Simon Coveney of Fine Gael informed the Dáil that the records are not available to the general public as they contain private, sensitive information and are protected by the Data Protection and Freedom of Information Acts. Now, Section 8.2 of the 1986 National Archive Act excludes from the terms of the Act records over 30 years old which contain information that might cause, and I quote, "distress or danger to living persons on the grounds that they contain information about individuals or would or might be likely to lead to damages for defamation," unquote. In a way, Minister Coveney's answer was laced with irony, given that the government had no hesitation in opening the IRA pension files to facilitate historians working with the government on the Decade of Commemorations 2012 to 22 project, files that are at least as sensitive. And it's worth noting that long before this, the records pertaining to the 6 counties of Northern Ireland had been transferred to the Public Record Office in Northern Ireland in 1922. And these records became openly accessible to researchers. It's interesting that opening the records in Prony to the research public has not resulted in any major controversies, at least not that I'm aware of. But one must consider that much different circumstances prevailed in the Free State stroke Republic after 1923, especially in relation to the compulsory acquisition and redistribution of lands and government policies that were more likely to give rise to contention. In June 2021, after a good deal of attention in print and on the social media to the opening of the Land Commission records, Minister for Agriculture Charlie McConalogue announced in the Dáil that the department is examining the possibility of digitising certain key search aids, which will enable electronic searches to be carried out by members of the public in order to ascertain if specific records exist, unquote. Now, some historians and genealogists got excited on social media, and perhaps rightly so, that a step in the right direction was being taken. But somehow they missed the point that all the key search aids in the world are useless if the records themselves are not then accessible. It's akin to showing someone the index to a book, but refusing them access to the main text. Or imagine the consternation of the historians of the revolutionary period, who over the last decade or so have greatly reappraised their understanding of 1920 to 23 through the release of the Bureau of Military History records, if they had been told, "We've just digitized these wonderful indexes, revealing who was involved in the War of Independence and Civil War, but you're not allowed to see the actual witness statements or the IRA pension files." But it is better to remain positive and optimistic for the future. Minister McConnell, who pointed out that the Land Commission staff were engaged in a long-term project to transfer Land Commission documents from their original storage boxes into modern fireproof storage boxes. And it was quite clear from a recent visit and tour of the Land Commission archives that the staff are doing all in their power to look after them properly, and that the records are now stored under appropriate archival conditions. But they are still working records, not yet defined as historical manuscripts, which means they continue to be handled as working records, and this cannot be good for them. In conclusion, the Irish Land Commission was the body that gathered the richest social history of the country for a period of over 100 years, the most pivotal period in modern Irish history, reaching from the beginning of the Land War to the decades beyond Ireland's entry to the European Economic Community, now the European Union. These are the records that document the modernisation of Ireland, that some might say reveal its very soul. They're at least as important as the records of the revolutionary period, which have rightly benefited from huge capital and personnel investment in the last decade or so. In fact, it may very well be the Land Commission records that ultimately define the history of how the Irish Revolution played itself out in the decades after independence. After all, the Land Commission affected considerably more people than the War of Independence and Civil War put together. They're in so many respects the founding records of the Irish state and deserve to be treated with that respect. The fact that so many records may already have been lost, including correspondence as mentioned previously, and that others are obviously already in a fragile condition, surely points to the need to digitize them all as a matter of urgency. It's now proposed to invest 5 million in the digitization of the 1926 census. Surely the Land Commission records deserve an investment of at least the same, given that they can reveal much more about Irish rural society and life, not just at one given point in time. Thank you very much.